Hello, everybody. What the Flick is What the Fright this month. We're talking about the best horror movies of the 21st century so far. We can only get to so many of them. I know some of you are antsy, running down to the wire, but we definitely had to make time for something from this year. And we've had a lot of great horror movies this year. Get Out, Raw, and a movie that's still in theaters now. Everybody's still talking about it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about It? Lead us into a clip.
Based on the classic novel by Stephen King, directed by Andy Muschietti, is, in my view, one of the best horror films of the past 10 years.
Holy crap. Well, let's take a look.
There you go. She's all ready, Captain.
Thanks, Billy. It's not like any time I've ever been in before. People die or disappear 6 times the national average. And that's just grown-ups. Kids are worse.
I saw something. There was this
Clown.
Look. It's all connected by the sewers. That's where it lives. What happened? Bill?
Bill, if you'll come with me, you'll float too. You'll float too. You'll float too. You'll float too. You'll float too.
Greg McLean, your horror movie credentials are established. Wolf Creek 2, Rogue, my personal favorite. What is it about what Andy Muschietti did with It that makes it, in your opinion, one of the best horror movies of the last 10 years? What did he capture?
I think, to me, I feel like, a lot of really great horror films, that when the director emphasizes something other than the horror, and basically focuses, the horror aspect is obviously a huge part of it, but the story it's telling actually has a completely different level. So for example, it is a coming of age story set in, 90s America. So for me, that was the kind of genius of it, to basically take this, deeply, deeply scary story, but make it 10 times scarier by actually focusing on the reality and the relationships of these characters as these kids try and deal with this in a very, very realistic way.
Yeah.
And, that's kind of why I think it's partly so powerful.
I'm going to minor correction. I think it was said in 1989.
Oh, no,
and
no,
that's
no.
a lot of 80s nostalgia enthusiasts who are already like, stop typing the comment.
Yes.
We're good. We got it. And that was something interesting, I think, because the book was published in the 1980s, and it had nostalgia for the 1950s,
Yeah.
and that was a time period where people were nostalgic for the 1950s. Now we feel the same way about the 1980s.
Right.
It was a relatively prosperous time.
Yep.
It was a socially conservative time, and things
Yeah.
felt very safe. For a lot of people, there was still the threat of the Cold War,
Right.
and the pop culture was booming. There was a lot of amazing stuff out there that we
Yeah.
all had this deep connection with, and it's almost, he does such a good job evoking it, but it's almost too easy
Right.
to get us emotionally connected to the 80s, but I think he nails it.
Yeah. And I think also that's, if you think about that updating, it does slot in kind of perfectly in terms of what the purpose of being set in that 50s environment does, and what the kind of, because for some reason, it is interesting how much the 80s are kind of now seen as this kind of golden period of kind of pop culture. The Back to the Future movies were out, Goonies, the early, the kind of iconic Spielberg films were happening at that time.
Well, we had a sudden glut of quality entertainment geared at kids,
Right.
which wasn't necessarily common. You had like 1 or 2 good movies a year. Here, everything was coming out all at once.
Right.
And so if you're growing up in that time period, there was a lot to connect to.
Yeah.
You brought up something interesting. You brought up how, like, it, even though it's a story about a demon clown that transforms into your greatest fear, it does also play as like a coming-of-age story.
Right.
And I think I've heard people say, I'm not sure how ironic they're being, that it's not a horror movie. It's a drama that happens to have a supernatural demon clown. I'm not sure I buy that, but what do you think about that?
I mean, on one level, like generally, I agree with that idea. And to illustrate my point, it's like saying that think about movies like Jaws and The Exorcist, and think about The Shining, and it's and also Alien. Now, I'd put those as the top 4 studio-produced and best horror films of all time.
Okay, I'm not gonna fight you on that.
Each of those films also focuses on a very strong a story or a different emphasis. So basically, you can say that Aliens is kind of truckers in space as a concept that's basically trying to create a very, very realistic group of characters and context in which the alien's obviously terrifying and scary and violent stuff.
Right.
But without that emphasis on the reality of the characters and the real world setting, making that sci-fi world totally real world and relatable, the movie doesn't work. And it gains its power as a horror film from being so based on being so meticulous about the characters and relationships. You could say the same with Exorcist. It's a mother and daughter story, a mother trying desperately to protect her mother, a single mother as well, which is a big point in that story as well. So it's this family trying to protect from this overwhelming kind of evil, and the film ultimately comes this question of faith tale.
And you're right, and it's interesting you pick those two because I feel like all of those movies kind of connect. Like The Exorcist and The Shining are both like if you took out the supernatural element, they're stories of families in crisis.
Right.
And if you took out the monster element of Jaws and Alien, you're still dealing with stories about sort of capitalism. People who want to make money and they're willing to let people die in order to do it, and that's inherently dramatic.
Yeah.
Regardless, in it, we have a group of kids who are at an age, they're in puberty, they're starting to deal with real difficulties, real dangers, real monsters in their lives. They would have to do that even without the clown.
Yeah.
But at the same time, isn't there still a demon clown? Like, how do we not call it a horror movie?
Look, it's definitely. I mean, there's no question. It's because it's terrifying. I mean, I found it really scary, and I think a lot of people are finding it really, really scary because it's a fantastically well-made movie, and it's horrifying. But what I would argue that it's a really good horror film. It's a much better horror film, and I feel like it's connecting very broadly because of the emphasis on and attention paid to the reality, the realism of the characters.
That's fair. Andy Muschietti does some really incredible things. Like he's made a movie that is full of dread, but it's also jump out of your seat, spill your popcorn, scary.
Right.
And I loved watching how, because there's this period in the middle where all of the members of the Losers Club, they each have to have their own moment with Pennywise.
Right.
And it runs the risk of getting a little episodic there for a bit, because they all have to have that moment so that they can all come together and say, you've seen him too.
Yeah, right.
But he does this really good job of keeping all of those scares varied.
Yeah.
They don't happen the same way. They don't use the same tricks. We just lost the light. See, Pennywise is
Pennywise
watching.
Is here.
Pennywise is watching. It's super creepy. But he would do something like that. The lights would drop out at a certain time. There's a scene where the kid is at the library.
Right.
And Pennywise is chasing him.
Yeah.
And then the sound cuts out real fast and then just explodes again as Pennywise races at the camera.
Yeah.
What a wonderful way to just sort of mix and match your horror, because I've seen too many horror movies where the scares are on a clock.
You feel like that,
every 5 seconds.
Right.
You get used to them. You can't. They don't work.
Yeah. I think that's part of the admirable thing about this film is that in terms of designing each of those moments, you can see how much thought's gone into making sure that each one feels like it's a different kind of scare, and they're really creative. Like there's some great ideas in there, like and look, if you break down kind of how the scares work in any kind of horror film the past 5 or 10 years, they kind of work the same way. Like there's only a couple of gags you can do, but it's just how you do them. And it's kind of like jazz, where you basically say there's the misdirect where you look that way, come back and something's moved or something's there to reveal something. You could kind of just chart them out. But the skill, I think, when you see filmmakers jump into those things and say, okay, I'm going to do something really fun and creative. I'm going to take that idea and then sort of riff on it and do this twist to it. That's the kind of fun watching a film like that.
The movie I look to when people talk about just what's a great jump scare movie is Evil Dead 2.
Right.
And what Sam Raimi does in that movie is it's full of jump scares. It's full of fake outs and it's not behind that, it's not behind that. But the rhythm is never predictable.
Right.
You think about just how long it takes between, and there's no math to it. It feels random.
Yeah.
Even though obviously it's very calculated to feel random, so that it will hit you. Really, really suddenly. And I think that's one of the great things about it is that it feels like a great drama. And it's a great popcorn movie.
Yeah, it is it's a great ride.
What is your relationship to the book and miniseries that came before?
I read the book, a long, long time ago when I was young. And it was just to me, it was a really important experience because, you know, it was a book that I got totally drawn into. You know, when you read a great book and you basically just want to you're inside the world of the story, you just never want it to end.
Yep.
Because it's actually quite a big book as well.
Yeah, the book never does end.
No.
The book's like 1,000 pages long.
And after that 12 months when I finished reading it, no, but it does feel like you're basically, you can live in the world with those characters, you know, in a kind of big, interesting way. So I had a big connection to the book just as a fan. The series I just thought was, I really liked the series, but ultimately, you know, I mean, the book is so terrifying because you can imagine it. I think at the time that filmmaking couldn't really go there, and I'm so curious to see how the next episode, the next half is, because now we really get into the tough stuff. Because I think it was amazing that we pulled off this time, but now we're going to the, like, how do you pull off the, you know, other stuff.
Other stuff. I will say this. I rewatched the miniseries after I had seen the new one, and I was impressed by how well certain things work. Like the young performances in particular. Emily Perkins, the late Jonathan Brandis. They give great performances.
Yeah.
But one thing I think Andy Muschietti did that was very, very wise was he completely separated the stories.
Yeah.
If you rewatch the miniseries again, it's built in a flashback structure as all of the adult characters remember what happened, and it really messes with the pacing. Here, if it wasn't popular enough to justify making a second one, I'm glad it was, but if it hadn't been, it would just be as good movie.
Right.
You would never need another ensemble.
Yeah,
like it's so self-contained, it's so effective.
Right.
And I admire that.
It's very clever for them. I wonder if they did that. I don't know if they did that to think, well, the movie might not be a huge hit. This would be a great self-contained movie, which it kind of is.
Yeah.
If that film ended with that ending, you go, that was a really great movie.
Very satisfying.
Yeah.
Last thoughts on it before we close up shop.
Gosh, I want to. It's a film that, as a horror film director, I want to watch again because I saw it the first time and I was just so excited and impressed with it and had so much fun in the theater with it. I just want to go watch it again because I love seeing how different directors kind of conduct it, and I thought that it was just full of really great primary imagery. I thought the performance of Pennywise was so much fun. It's a great film.
I describe this as, maybe you could argue it's not the best Stephen King movie because they're amazing Stephen King movies like The Shining and The Shawshank Redemption. I'm not going to fight you too hard. I feel like this is in many respects the most Stephen King movie.
Yeah.
All the things that we associate with the best parts of Stephen King's storytelling.
Yeah.
Really strong coming-of-age stories, an emphasis on the evil lurking within our cultural nostalgia, and just a really great monstrous hook. It all comes together really perfectly, and it really just plays.
I would say on that, it's almost like I think the other truly great. I think The Shining is the greatest horror film, not necessarily the greatest Stephen King adaptation.
It's rather
but
unfaithful,
I think Stand By Me. If you take Stand By Me and add the horror elements of The Shining, you kind of have it, because what you've got is all of the fidelity to his language and the quirkiness of his personality as a writer, with genuinely terrifying scares. So he managed to kind of capture those two things, and I'd be surprised if he wasn't really referencing Stand By Me as a kind of tonal reference, because it feels kind of like that.
It's a brilliant movie.
It's that endless summer and childhood in this small town.
Yeah.
So,
well said. So we're going to give us a rating on the What the Flick scale of 0 to 10 with all the points in between. I loved it. I think it's going to be a little long before we can truly decide just how amazing it is, and it might end up being affected by the sequel.
Yes.
The sequel might make it seem better in retrospect. It might seem better than the original, and then the original scales back. But I'm giving this movie right now, as of today, like a solid 9.5. In terms of entertainment value, satisfying drama, this is one of, again, Raw, Get Out. There's a lot of amazing, brilliant horror movies this year. Hopefully we get the chance to talk about one or two more. But it is pretty superlative.
Yeah.
Do you have a score you want to give it?
You read my mind. I was thinking 9.5 is my score as well.
It's pretty solid.
I agree.
Pretty solid. So everybody, Greg McLean's new film Jungle is now available in theaters and on video on demand. Check that out. It stars Daniel Radcliffe pulling things out of his body and getting stuck in quicksand. It's really gross. So take a look.